Now that we know the basics of how components work, let's use components to make our mullions and columns. I'm going to start with the mullions. I'm just going to move to the outer edge of this model, and we'll go to this edge here. So I'm going to zoom out a little bit so you can see where I am. So I've just kind of rotated around. I'm at the back of the wall where the window is, and I'm starting with this mullion. So if I've drafted carefully, or if I've gotten a plan that's been drafted carefully, I know that my mullions and columns are relatively going to be the same size. The columns will change a little bit because some of them have some furring, some walls built around them, but for the mullions they should all be roughly the same size. So first thing I do is I'm just tracing using a rectangle, double clicking on it, making it a group. Now I'm going to right click and I'm going to make this a component. So before I pull this up into space, I just want to copy using my move copy along the outer edge of the wall. And in some cases I should be able to do ×2, and it should pop right into place because these should be evenly spaced. Most buildings are designed in a way where the mullions are evenly spaced. But you can see that I've got some uneven spacing in some sections. So I'm just doing move and copy, and I'm just copying in place. So I'm hitting the Alt key, and I'm copying, and this time I can do it again. I can do ×1, 2, 3, so ×3, and that plops them right into place. And move copy. And it looks like I can probably select this area here and move copy this whole group all at once. I shouldn't say group, this whole selection all at once, because these are all pretty even as well. Alright, and we'll just take it to the final couple here. Whoops, and if I just move it a little bit off edge, I'm just going to bring it back to where it belongs. And click. Alright, so I've gotten all of my mullions in place. Now I can see here, looking at my elevation, that my mullion goes to just about that point. So if I hit my select, if I get my select cursor up and going, I can double click on that component, any of them by the way, it doesn't matter if you go with the one that you started. Activate my push-pull and push-pull that up and match to that point at the top of the elevation. And you can see they all come up all at once. So I don't have to do this over and over again. Now, if I want to draw in the bottom window section using a rectangle, I'm just going to go from column to column, double click on that, and let's make it a group, and let's bring this up 2 inches. Now I can assume that this is going to be the same spacing in between each of these columns. So I'm going to right click on this and I'm going to make this a component as well. And I'm going to also bring it up to the top by hitting my copy button. So let's go ahead and take these, select them both, activate the move copy, and bring them around. Notice I'm getting nice and close to that point there. Now I'm just going to make sure that they're matching. Good, they are. So I can do ×2, enter, and that's going to bring it to my final point here. Now what I can do is I can adjust this by getting underneath it. Sometimes it helps to get right underneath something, even if you're going into geometry. Push-pull this up and match it to this top point. You'll notice it's doing it to all of them. And why? That's because it's a component. So it's going to be treating one like they're all the same. Now I can close that. So I've got all my mullions done, and that took me almost no time. Let's do the same thing with our columns. So I'm going to start with one here, and I'm going to make it a rectangle. Double click, make it a group. Now right click and make it a component. Now as I copy this using my copy button from column to column, I can see that in some cases it's bumped out a little bit. So I'm going to deal with that in a moment. First things first, I'm just going to copy it into place. Now I need to make sure, notice there I didn't get it right on. So I'm going to get nice and close and copy it over. If I'm slightly off in a lot of these cases, I'm going to run into some trouble. So I'm going to select my 1, 2, 3 columns here, and I'm going to copy them all at once to the outer edges, to there. Now in these cases out here, I can see that I'm slightly off in terms of the size of the column. This one needs to just be moved over, and that might just be the way the building was done. But if I want all of these columns to look exactly the same, I can scale this using my scale tool out until it bumps into the outer edge of the column. And I can do the same thing here, scale it out till it bumps into that point. And that's not going to affect the way the component works because the component is closed. So I'm not editing it, I'm just changing the shape of the closed component. Alright, so we've got 6 columns there. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to double click, open it up, I'm going to push pull it all the way up to the top and match the top of the wall. So all my columns will go up at once. Now I'm going to give this a little detail at the top. So I'm going to do an offset. And I'm going to offset from the top 2 inches in and push pull this 4 inches down. So I've given a little reveal at the top. I'm going to, while this is open, select the whole thing, right click, and flip it along its blue direction. And the reason I'm doing that while it's open, and the reason I've selected the whole thing, is because I want to treat this like I'm editing it, and I want it to happen to all of them at once. Because I'm going to do the same thing again. This time I'm going to offset the top 4 again. I'm sorry, it was 2, enter, and then push pull that down 4 inches. And close. So what I will have is I will have these kind of beefed out columns, and they're all going to act exactly the same way all the way around. In this case, we've got some furring here. We're just going to ignore that for the sake of this assignment, so don't worry about that. Just worry about making these columns into components because that's really all we want to do. Okay, so go ahead and make your mullions and make your columns and make them components. You don't have to do this exact detail if you don't want to. I'm not that concerned about it. I just want to see that when I open your model up, if I click on one column and I click on the whole thing, I can see that all of the other columns are active because they're all components. So before you turn your homework in, make sure that when you double click or triple click on your mullions and your columns, that they're all components. And if they're not, if one so happens to not be, just go ahead and delete it and copy another one over.